Joining me now here on the Knicks Film School pregame show with the Knicks taking on the Charlotte Hornets again for the second time in 6 days. I'm not talking about the Hornets again. Much love to my friends at the Buzzbeat podcast, Richie Randall, and all of my friends down in Charlotte. If you want a full preview of the Hornets and their season and what's going on, just go back 6 days and check out the pregame pod that I did with them there. Instead, I want to talk about the league. And so let's talk about all things NBA with friend of the pod, returning guests, and one half of the Hardwood Knocks podcast, as well as, I don't know if he's a hero or a villain to Knicks fans over at Bleacher Report, Mr. Dan Favale. Dan, welcome back.
Oh, it's good to be back. Thank you so much for having me, Claudio. How are you doing?
I'm good, and I'll take some people a little behind the scenes that this is your Game 5 in Utah game podcast, because I'm appreciative. Dan is a little under the weather today, and he still made time to talk Knicks and to talk about the NBA with me. So I always appreciate someone that goes that extra mile to come on this podcast. I want to talk about the league at large, and we'll save Knicks talks for the end. And just a very simple question to start. So 11 games, just about for every team. What's one early trend that surprised you in a good way?
The Rockets being good.
Yeah,
I know that they acquired some solid talent in Dylan Brooks, Fred VanVleet over the offseason, even Jeff Green. I just didn't trust that they would. Again, they're 9 games into the season, so these are all the caveats apply.
But
they have coalesced into this actual force, and I really respect what they did offensively. After the first game or two, it just became clear, oh no, things need to run through and for Alperen Şengün. They've made that switch and they haven't looked back. I think Fred VanVleet, the efficiency inside the arc is still all over the place. The attention he commands just opened things up for everybody. The connection he has with Alperen Şengün is already awesome. I think Şengün has probably been one of the 10 most entertaining players to watch this year. Not best players, but just entertaining, where it's, what is this guy going to do next? And part of that is because you don't fully understand it because he wasn't playing enough in seasons past. And even just there are some things that won't sustain. Opponents are shooting poorly from three, really poorly, I believe. Dylan Brooks has not missed a three this season, apparently. But there's a real difference in the style they're playing, where Dylan Brooks is no longer taking these janky off the dribble jumpers. Between Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, Amen Thompson, even when he was healthy, getting Tari Eason back, some of the minutes Jae'Sean Tate has given you, even Jabari Smith Jr., there's been real defensive cohesion there for them. Jeff Green has provided a steady presence off the bench. Jalen Green, rough beginning. He's really starting to level off, though, and they've run some units, or I should frame it this way. When you watch them, they're more inclined to have Jalen Green run his independent units from Şengün than Fred VanVleet, where they've decided FEV is going to be tethered to Şengün, and we're going to let Jalen Green kind of be more independent in the reserve heavier units. A lot of those units are actually playing pretty well. And so they've been one of the most entertaining teams for me this year. And I will add, and you included this in your notes, the Timberwolves defense is for real, and it's just entirely unexpected. Even if you thought Rudy Gobert and Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels were going to be this good, I've never seen Naz Reid defend better. He used to just be ultra switchable, and now he's he's a backline stopper as well. And Karl Anthony Towns, still very slow-footed, can still get caught, in nowheresville in space. He's been good defensively too. And so that's a team where they can kind of figure out their offense, get their 3-point volume up a little bit, accuracy up a little bit, and that comes down to Cat. They might be the second or third best team in the West.
They low-key just recreated the Jazz, right? Except Anthony Edwards is better than Donovan Mitchell, and Cat is bigger, and Cat's obviously better offensively than Bogey or whatever Taurean Prince or whoever they used to have in Utah, right?
Right. I think the bigger difference, too, is that Utah, and this is why I could never understand Jazz fans and even some national fans, is growing disdain for Royce O'Neal when he was at the end of his term. It's oh, he's cooked defensively. And it's, no, he's not cooked defensively. It's that he's not Jaden McDaniels, who will literally erase anyone you want him to. And that is the bigger difference and of course, they're playing dual bigs, which isn't something Utah did. They got away from that eventually. And so having just so many, when you look at their starting five right now, I'd say Cat is probably still below average defender, but if he's your worst defender, this version of him right now, you have 4 above average defenders, even including Mike Conley, who's older, but is just super smart. And so they've proven to be a force already. They gave the Nuggets a run for their money to open the playoffs last year. And we saw they really rankled Denver with the way they're like, well, Kat, you guard Jokic, and then we're going to have you, Rudy, clean up stuff behind you. There's not really another team right now that can do that. And so, if you're Knicks fans, I get why you might not be super interested in the Timberwolves, but that's like, those are one of the teams that they could really pop, where we're talking about them in the vein of, oh, did they just win 2 playoff series?
So it's funny you say are Knicks fans not interested in the Timberwolves. Well, they've come up a ton because of the cat of it all. And like, we'll get to Knicks thoughts later and how internal growth might just make superstar talk go away completely. But like, Cat is always going to be on the Knicks radar, and seeing the growth of Naz Reid and seeing how much better the Timberwolves are defensively, specifically with Reid on the floor for Cat, and going with the Gobert Naz Reid lineups, that stood out. I will say, as far as the Rockets are concerned, so how sustainable do you think that is? You mentioned the 3-point luck that they're getting, and whether they're going to be 9th in offense and 3rd in defense, I don't think so. But I mean, I have their over for a prediction this season. I thought they would win more than 31 games.
I hit that under. I
also have them finishing 12th in the conference. I figured this is like a 33-win team, but are we now readjusting and this is like closer to 40?
I want to say yes, but the things to kind of look are Fred VanVleet's offense, his shooting specifically, might normalize a little bit inside the arc. But like, what happens with Şengün playing this role over a more extended period of time, something he hasn't done? What happens when Amen Thompson comes back, to where he's been a part of some really good defensive units, but he's a rookie. So are you going to get into a dilemma where you want to get him run, but you're so much worse off on the floor? You kind of have to decide, is his development coming at the expense of wins? There's also going to be a point where the Rockets' own 3-pointers are going to stop falling. And is that going to embolden Dylan Brooks to take more off the dribble looks once his 3-pointer stops falling? I don't think that I'd be shocked if they finished 4th in the West. That would be even right now. But I do think we need to recalibrate. And I think I said this leading into the offseason. The only teams I was sure, or leading into the regular season, the only teams in the West I was positive were going to be worse than the Rockets were the Blazers. And I said maybe the Spurs. And now it's okay. Well, it's definitely the Blazers. It's definitely the Spurs. Now it's time to start talking about the Jazz and the Pelicans in that same conversation. If you're not a believer in whatever the Clippers are doing, I understand. So you could throw them in there too.
So I need you to mention an offense that you either are excited by or the early trend, because there's the Dallas offense. There's obviously the Indiana offense, the Hawks. Like, the Knicks just saw it the other night. They've seen it twice this year where they've really had to outscore the Hawks. So which offense is standing out to you the most? I
mean, the Rockets are still fun to watch on offense. I'll make it clear. The Pacers they are the best show on offense in basketball right now. The best way I can describe it is they are accessible to everyone who likes basketball. You will be entertained, but you cannot multitask when you watch them, because if you put your head down to tweet something or look at something, there's a chance that Tyrese Halliburton has just done something else, where it's like they are going to run off makes, they're going to run off misses, they're going to run off steals, and all the different things Tyrese Halliburton is doing. I think Caitlin Cooper was talking about this a couple days ago. They even have him doing more off the ball. And so it's like, oh my God, you got to defend this guy off the ball now too, in addition to him kind of flicking up these off the dribble looks, these tough angled layups, the way he throws these lobs, these hit aheads. It's nonstop. And they are so uninhibited when it comes to some of the lineups they're running. And it's been a joy to see Obi Toppin, where it's transition, whatever, like he can do some stuff there. He's probably underachieved. You watch them in the half court, the dude is just never not moving. It's like, he's a pinball is what he's become. And it's so cool to see. And the Pacers have the ability to run their offense that way and open up the floor for him in a way that the Knicks did not. And he also doesn't have a 2-time All-NBA power forward in front of him, which also helps. They're just fun. I don't know if they're going to be caps lock good, because the defense is like, the defensive issues are real. They like to play small. Teams will hunt Halliburton. And like, aside from Bruce Brown, and it depends on how much you play Andrew Nembhard, and of course you have Miles Turner there, it feels like they need a sturdier combo wing to really bring that all together. But it's watching the Pacers counts as cardio. Like, it's that exhilarating.
I I hate it because of the Nick Pacer rivalry that still exists to me, at least, and maybe this rejuvenates it. Listen, I have my rivalries that I hold on to. It came back last year when the Knicks played the Heat in the playoffs, and I got to relive some of the late 90s series. But, we'll see if we get like a 4-5 or, who knows where both of these teams end up in the future. I've been reluctant to jump on the Pacers, not bandwagon, but the show. Before the season, I had them 6th in my predictions. I had them finishing 6th, and
you might have them higher than me then.
So here's the problem though. The day before we released our predictions, I got spooked and was like, you know what? That's a young team, and I pushed them to 8th, and I switched them with Atlanta. And from what I've seen from Atlanta this year, and then what I've seen from the Pacers, like, if I'd stuck with that, I'd look so much smarter. Which, like, whatever that means. But I'm glad the offense is what I thought it would be. And it, like you said, it's a really fun League Pass team, which we'll talk about in a bit. And look, the Obi of it all, I hate when it becomes, especially when Randall was struggling in the beginning, and it was like, see, we could have had Obi. It's like, yeah, but we don't have Halliburton. So I don't know if it was ever going to matter. It's my take when the trade happened was like, he's going to look great there, and the Knicks will probably be fine, And I think that's what has happened. And I think it's really cool that he can look great there, and the Knicks are kind of fine without him.
I think there should be a mutual appreciation for the situations where it's just like,
but there's no world for mutual nuance.
I think if you're going to be frustrated by anything, you could say that they maybe held on to Obi Toppin for too long. It would have been better for them just to make the decision to move him sooner
because of the compensation they got back.
But it's yes, but the only reason, like, he didn't show out enough in New York because the minutes just weren't there, because you have Julius Randle, who's a very good basketball player, in front of him. And so you also, based off what the Knicks were doing, kind of needed something different out of the players you were bringing off the bench than Obi Toppin. And so when there was a higher mystique around him, like, they probably should have been a little bit more, and this is tough because of knowing how Julius Randle played, but like after his second year is probably when they should have been a little bit more open to like seeing how much better would the compensation have been in that moment.
So 2 counterpoints. One, they tried to trade him for Donovan Mitchell. So it's not like they didn't try to trade him. They just,
there's a difference between including him in a star package and then sending him to Indiana for seconds, though.
You're right. But when did they finally send him to Indiana for 2 seconds? When they had Josh Hart. Once they finally had what they viewed as a suitable backup 4, they moved on and then delegated those minutes to DiVincenzo, which fits what Obi's role is, a corner 3-point shooter,
Yeah, but just here's the thing, though, is because when you found that in Josh Hart, that just proves that how different what you needed off the bench was than in Obi. And so, like, I don't think those 2 decisions needed to be tethered together. Where it was, if you wanted to move Obi a little bit sooner, it didn't have to wait until you had the ideal backup 4 option.
One last counterpoint. In the playoffs, when Julius hurt his ankle, game 4 against the Cavs, Obi played that entire 4th quarter because Julius was still figuring life out with this ankle. If you're just in a world where you're putting the transaction in a vacuum, I agree with you. They did not get him at his highest value point, and they didn't trade him at that point. They were still in the business of trying to win basketball games, and the Knicks were best option for backup power forward at the time was Obi Toppin in a role he's not suited to be in. I agree with you. Like, they probably could have gotten more for Obi Toppin at a different point. They probably could have just held on to Obi and like waited this year and see what happens. Like, see if at the deadline this year it made more sense.
No, not after.
You think it would have?
No, my point is like the fact that when he's been on the court, like the RJ units that they've been able to get to, I don't know that Obi would have allowed those to happen. So send him to Indiana for no picks at that point, if it means that we get to see these lineups this season that we've got to see.
I love, like, Obi finally breaking out against the Sixers was cool to see. And I think that was the moment that the Indiana thing kind of became real to me. Like, I thought they were scoring these points against really poor defenses and doing what the trick that net rating and offensive rating does with us each year. Is like, yeah, they're beating up on bad teams, and then when they play the good teams, they are kind of stifled. And you looked at what they did to Philly, and I was like, oh, okay, that's a little different. That's Joel Embiid. That's a decent enough defense, which is why I'm curious when they play a Minnesota or the Celtics, which they did play the Celtics without Halliburton and lost by 100,000. But like, I'm curious to see when they play the Knicks, I'm curious what they do when the rim is just unavailable.
I do think just the space that they create, so the different angles at which you can go and attack, even teams that are able to really protect or dissuade looks at the rim. Well, that's something that Obi never would have had in you, because he's still not hitting his threes or taking enough of them by volume. Like, that's a thing that's still happening in Indiana. The difference is just that it's not just giving him the freedom to roam. It's also giving him the room to like actually roam in the half court. The Knicks just aren't built that way. And so it's just, I think that's why there's a mutual appreciation where he's in a better situation and the Knicks just, the discourse around Julius Randle is so divisive, but you can't, Obi was never good enough to justify, well, this is the reason we need to move on from Julius Randle. Like, that was just, that never could have been a thing. And so I find it easy to very much, we can disagree on, I might have moved him a little bit sooner. Maybe the offers weren't that much better. Maybe it was like a top 21st. And at that point it's whatever. But just the fact that he's in a better situation, you do still have your depth. It's not like you totally obliterated your backup four options. And as you said, you did wait until Josh Hart was there. So there's just I don't know, it's not a both sides one trade, but I think it's easy to look at it and understand the process of events and just be happy that, okay, Obi has found his fit.
I wonder if we went behind the scenes, which we'll never get to see because it's the Knicks. If there was like a push and pull in the little Leon Rose brain trust of Julius, all NBA Julius versus the year after he won most improved player. And if it was like, we need to see that this Julius thing is real.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah.
Like there may have been a version where it's like, okay, this first year of Jalen Brunson is kind of a wait and see for Julius too. And then when he returned to all NBA levels, that's when, they were like, okay, now we can start to move on from Obi.
If you really want to get mad, and this is something I'm not still mad at, but it was because I'm so often wrong that the fact that I was right, I so badly wanted the Knicks to take Halliburton in the draft. You go ahead and stew in that rather than what Obi's doing in Indiana.
Which, again, I had no idea what Julius Randle's going to be that season. On draft night, when the Knicks got Obi, there was a lot of like, local kid from New York. He's Amari 2.0. There, Julius Randle on the trade block. Here we go, and we're gonna win 12 games. Randle goes out and wins most improved player, and they're the 4 seed, and it's like, so this is awkward. So I always wonder behind the scenes, like, if they thought that Obi was going there to be the power forward of the future, and Julius Randle just became an all-NBA player as a result. I agree. There should be a mutual appreciation where we can enjoy both what this Knicks team is post-Obi and what Obi Toppin has become in Indiana, despite it being for a bitter rival. I agree with you. The Pacers show has been fun to watch. I'm very curious what happens when they have to play defense. Let's go to the negative. Like, what is one early thing that has stood out to you that is in a negative way? Something that has been disappointing, that has regressed. If you want to make this an anti-Clippers conversation, we can. I was bullish on when they first made the trade, and I was like, all right, I think this will work out because it's the small ball Rockets on steroids. But what it's looked like so far is like, you know what you might need out there? A rebounder. So what do you think?
The Clippers are a disappointment, but I still think they kind of figure it out. And Russ volunteering to come off the bench is a legitimate big deal. And it's also, we don't need to pile on the Clippers. It's a disaster right now. I think they showed some progress in that game against the Nuggets. Except the caveat being, the Nuggets didn't have Jamal Murray, and like they couldn't figure out how to get to their best lineups to defend Jokic. And even when they did, they went away from them. The Clippers have been a disappointment, but there's still a chance that they just figure it out. I think a lot of people look at Phoenix's availability. Bradley Beal going to be out another 3 weeks. If I would have told you in August, when James Harden was still a Sixer, that by Christmas, the Clippers would have played more minutes with Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and James Harden than the Suns played with Beal, Durant, and Booker, you probably would have thought I was bonkers.
Kevin Durant went to Phoenix and they recreated the Nets. They're just never going to play their 3 best players together. And we're all going to be like, yeah, but if they play together, it'll look great. Yeah, when are they going to play together? It's the exact same situation.
I'm still going to, so we were talking about this on our podcast that goes live on Saturday, that you need Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. That if Bradley Beal is injured, it's kind of okay. And I think they'll be fine. But like the Devin Booker absence, and now that he's back, now is when I'll start to evaluate them even without Beal more thoroughly. The actual disappointment for me, And anyone who's listened to me over the past couple of years knows that I can't quit the Pelicans. I'm very close to quitting the Pelicans. When their issues have always been being able to stay healthy. It's never been the ability. Now, all of a sudden, it's both because you're still not healthy. CJ's out. Jose Alvarado's out. Trey Murphy's out. Herb Jones missed some time. Brandon Ingram missed some time. Did I say Larry Nance yet? Like the injuries just go up and up and up. However, the minutes with their best players on the court should still be good. They are getting trucked when Zion and Brandon Ingram play together. And it's not that they're getting torched by unlucky opponent 3-point shooting either. It's Shamit Dua had wrote about this in the know. The ball is sticking with Ingram to the point where like Zion doesn't really know what to do. And he kind of threw shade. I don't know if you saw his comments a few days ago where it was, he's trying to fit in and figure it out. And it's, he is quite literally the future of your franchise. And you've gotten away from the point Zion stuff. He's definitely not as explosive as he's been in years past.
You're talking about real quick. You're talking about the comments where he was like, I'm still trying to buy in or figuring out if I want to buy in. Right.
It was that, but it was more of like, he didn't kind of understand what he was buying into. And that's whether you want to criticize Zion for that, the fact that he doesn't necessarily understand what he's buying into is a massive criticism of the organization. And to be losing the minutes those two play together, both of them are also, the Pelicans are losing the minutes in which one of them plays without the other. And they're actually a net positive when both of them are off the floor. And so again, the injuries contribute to this, but guess what? Injuries are the Pelicans' default. And I don't care how like the defensive fundamentals can still be there. The offense is just too broken for long stretches. And I don't know what the answer is for them. They have the assets to go and make a trade. But if you're going to be one, dealing with the health issues, and two, like what are you doing with Zion right now? If you're committed to playing him as kind of your point thingamabob, why is Brandon Ingram getting just kind of the agency that he is, or why is he playing the way that he is? And he's too talented to just be like, it'd be very difficult to trade Brandon Ingram and theoretically get better on paper, because even if you attach picks to him, like what is the team that is sending you the player that wants Brandon Ingram when he's going to be making a ton more money soon, even though he's relatively young, that's going to elevate you to the next level. And so these next like month worth of games or so for them are going to be huge, because there's been not as many highs as there should be, even when you measure it against the injuries that they've been dealing with.
So first of all, I'm on Cleaning the Glass, and I wanted to make sure I didn't miss that they added Thingamabob as a positional designation. So
they didn't?
Not yet. So
wow.
You're
can we email Ben? Was that Ben Glass? Does that?
That's Ben Glass. Yeah. So we'll make sure that we give you inventor credit on that for that Dan Favale special of positional designation of Thingamabob. I'm staring at this lineup data now. They're -7 with Zion and Ingram on. They're -10 with Zion on, Ingram off. They're -12 with Ingram on, Zion off, and +3 with both of them off the floor. That is, I didn't notice that yet. I talked to Mason Ginsberg a couple weeks ago when the Knicks played the Pelicans, and they were off to a 1-0 start. So I was like, oh, things are looking up. And things have not gone that way since then. It was obviously pre-CJ McCollum injury. Man, I don't want to talk
the fabric that should make everything fall apart, though, is the thing. Is like the units with him and Herb and then spacing were killer. And like you had Herb Jones was really turned a corner because he had more space to work and they were putting him on ball. Like he ran, like there was this one in like back-to-back possessions. I think I was watching, he ran like a pick and roll. I was like, I don't think I've ever seen that ever from him. And those were killer, but like you can't run your offense the same way when both Zion and Ingram are available. And it just feels like there is warring functionalities at play in New Orleans right now. Might be the best way for me to frame it.
I don't want to talk about transactions yet with them, because I feel like they're a team that gets thrown into trade machine a ton, whether it be uncertainty with either Brandon Ingram with his looming free agency or Zion and his, I feels like since he's been drafted, it's been like, how can he go to the Knicks? And I don't know if the Knicks want him at this point. I don't know if that's an upgrade because of the availability concerns from like him to Julius Randle. However, it does seem like they're a team that is going to do this one more season, and then wholesale changes are going to have to be made.
Yeah. And I think, look, right now, the saving grace is if you go back and look at the data from last year, they killed opponents when Zion and Ingram were on the court. And so like the recipe is still sort of there. But if you don't trust Zion to be, I guess, as explosive, or you don't want to put the ball in his hands as often, that just does change the context of what's happening. And so they're just a team I'm watching because something aside from injuries just feels off there.
Any other team stands out to you
as a disappointment?
Yeah. I go for my preseason picks. Like the Bucks defense is a thing, but I'm not.
So I would like to slightly push back on that. Just because
go ahead.
Ever since they've switched Brook back to a drop, they're like fifth in half-court defense. And like they're the best rim protecting team in the league. I think their issue is going to be, which I do agree with you on with this, would be they've been weird in transition. Like they've even gotten better in the half court where Damian Lillard still gets behind plays, but playing Andre Jackson a little bit more, I think has helped their defense. We'll see how losing Jay Crowder hurts. It's too easy to get out in transition on them. Teams get behind their guards, Malik Beasley, Dame a lot, even Giannis a little bit. When he takes shots that are outside of the restricted area, he's like kind of watching them. And then like when he's missing his 3-pointers so badly, like teams are able to run off of that. And so that's one thing I'm watching with them. But I think I've been surprised at how hard people have been where they think that it's sort of doomsday there. And it's, they're so thin. And when will Chris Middleton play more minutes? And we have these same questions about every contender except the Nuggets essentially right now.
Yeah. The only pushback I'll give to your pushback, sir, is there's a hint of who they're playing, like some opponent luck in that some of the offenses that they're playing, like what started. I get it what you're saying with Brook going back to a drop and them leaning back into their rim protection. That started in the tournament game against the Knicks, where RJ was out and Julius Randle, my goodness, might have gone to his official low in New York with how bad he was that game, and they were just. The way they were at the rim, they were playing a Knicks team that just could not buy a basket. And like it was a night that Jalen Brunson had 45 points and the Knicks had like 105. So like that started it. Then you have these really rough half court offenses in Chicago and Toronto and Orlando. And the one game that sticks out in that stretch that they lost was Indiana. So I do agree with you. I never thought that there were going to be bottom 5 in defense. And like the small sample size was nothing to fully buy into as this is the Bucks are in trouble. They got rid of their defense so that way they can get Dame. I do have a question long term about their point of attack, because I just don't know what they're going to do on the perimeter in the playoffs when you have to face these teams that have guys on the wing that, yes, fine, the rim has been taken away. What are you doing with Jason Tatum? I think Marjon Beauchamp or Andre Jackson could end up being an answer. I agree with you in the sense that you don't want them to be the answer in the playoffs. And so that's the thing. They're going to have to be on the floor for important minutes then. Can they be? I know like the game the Knicks played against them, Beauchamp hit like 5 threes and it was like, oh, okay, if that version exists, fine.
Right. Yeah, look, it's a fair question to have with them, and they don't have the assets to just go make a move. They might be able to reacquire like Javon Carter, who they let walk in free agency when the Bulls tear it down. I wonder if they have enough to get Ayo Dosunmu. Everyone wants them to get Alex Caruso. They just don't have enough. They don't have a first round pick to trade, and I don't think Marjon does it plus salary. Maybe
you saw that tweet, by the way. You saw that the I forget if it was Haynes or whoever it was that brought up Caruso to the Bucks and how like Caruso would be a great addition to that team, was whoever the source was. And I was like, that applies to 29 teams, man. Like Alex Caruso would fit on literally every team, right?
I just wonder, like, yeah, and it rings hollow when it's a team that doesn't have the assets to get him. We're sort of like, the Lakers would like to acquire Zach LaVine. It's like, okay, cool, with what? And they do
have the salary and the clutch connection. I agree with you. The assets are not like, what you want.
They don't want to trade Austin Reeves, and they can only give up 1 first round pick. It's like, all right, what are we doing here? Really quickly, another sort of disappointment. And
please.
He's played a little bit better over the past couple games. Josh Giddey just has me uncomfortable right now. He did such a good job of kind of fitting into the larger picture of what Oklahoma City was doing last year. He's shooting about 20% on catch and shoot threes this year, about 33% on floaters. The Thunder have been more inclined to let J-Dub wing Jalen Williams run units without Shea and Giddey than to let Giddey run units without Shea and J-Dub, which I think is just weird. Giddey's 2-point percentage is falling off a cliff without Shea. And so the fact that defenses are able to ignore him to the extent that he literally needs the gravity of both Shea and Holmgren on the court at the same time to be kind of a scoring threat, is just something I'm monitoring. And it's not, look, I don't mean to make this transactions, but like he's gonna be extension eligible this summer. And so it's like, it's a very real, with Case and Wallace there playing well as a rookie, it's a very real thing that they kind of have to like monitor and look at. And the other thing I will be watching, I know that opponents have burned them from 3 and the sample size isn't huge because of all the time, but the Cleveland starting 5 has a very, like, they've been bad defensively. And Jared Allen hasn't looked the same at points. Again, a lot of it's opponent 3-point shooting. And also Darius Garland's off to a slow shooting start himself. I think that normalizes. He's at like 27% on wide open threes or whatever it is. That is just something I'm watching because Cavs fans don't like to talk about this. And I get it because it's the lazy, we're not going too in depth here, but the dual big stuff matters offensively for Evan Mobley. They want him to do a lot of stuff in the center of the floor that's not available when Jared Allen's on the court. And so like if that defense isn't elite, caps lock, bold text, italics, elite, when those two are like in that starting 5, it's something just to question. I think that one is more likely to normalize than my Josh Giddey concern though.
Well, so I wonder with the Cleveland thing. So the Knicks, when they played this weird back-to-back 5 games into the season against the Cavs didn't have Allen for either one, and they only had LeVert for one of them. And it was like you're playing a beat-up Cavs team. It's funny, because of what happened in the playoffs last year, Evan Mobley went into that back-to-back thinking, oh, we owe them some payback. And then Mitchell Robinson just kind of picked up where he left off. And it was unfortunate for Mobley, who I have high projections for, that you still looked like you were not able to physically match up against this new version of Mitchell Robinson. That's just like Dennis Rodman plus Tim Duncan when it comes to the rebounds. Looking at their lineup data, what I wish I would have gotten a chance to talk to Justin about from the chase down is like they made the switch from Okoro to Max Strus in the starting 5. And the drop off in defense to have a respectable shooter there. I mean, their offense has gone up, but their defense is really what carried them last year. This team was 2nd in net rating last year. And I wonder if that concession is a little bit more drastic. Now, like you said, the transactional stuff and the Mitchell thing hovering over this, I wonder how much anxiety that's adding. But man, the early sample size of the Cavs, and like I had them finishing 3rd in the conference. Philly might change that, and I'm waiting for the bump to eventually show up for them. Well, maybe they get healthy and that changes everything. But like, at what point should the panic meter start with the Cavs?
I can't. If they probably deserve another month at least, just because of how small the sample size is when everyone's available. And like, look, that lineup that I was talking about, they're still winning those minutes. It's just that the defense is not as.
Which lineup are you talking about?
There isn't the Strus lineup was a net plus on the season. I thought
minus 2.2 at the moment.
All right, so maybe that's small,
but like that's how small the sample size is. 125 possessions.
Yeah, and so I would expect that. I would expect them to be fine. But it's still something that's like, oh, okay, well, this is sort of weird. And if one of these things don't turn, where it's, does Darius Garland start shooting better? Does the dual big minutes get better defensively? Like, are opponents still going to be hitting threes at a pretty high clip? Like, if one of those things just don't start to sort of shift, then it's, oh, okay, what's happening? Because they've had a lot of, LeVert's been good. Isaac Okoro's been good. Sometimes there's too much Donovan Mitchell, but he's been good. And also their offense is like, it's faster than last season, which makes them more dangerous. So I look at those, I'm kind of clinging to those bright spots. And even some of the Mobley without Allen units, not maybe the ones that they were rolling out when Allen wasn't starting, but it feels like there's a pathway to them to kill some of the opposing teams when you're going to run those Mobley plus like bench and 1 or 2 starter lineups that don't have Allen.
Well, speaking of offenses that look faster this year, I don't know if you agree, but this Knicks offense has looked a hint better. There's not as much. There's still the same amount of isolation. There's a hint more ball movement, especially with RJ on the floor. This is where I want to get your thoughts on the basketball team that I cover full time and the basketball team of your childhood, Dan, that you once had an affection for, before you started calling for them to fire the head coach in your day job.
Wondering how long it's going to take for that to come up.
Listen, it's going to come up every single time we talk, Dan. Your thoughts on the Knicks in this early start? What are you buying? What are you waiting to see if you want to buy in, whether it be Mitch on the offensive boards or this revelation of RJ Barrett, or even like the disappointing ones with Jalen Brunson, like taking a step back from unreal in the from 2-point range to just kind of average from 2-point range, or this back and forth Julius season that we've had.
Yeah. So the things I'll be buying with them, I'm bought in to the defense for the most part. The stuff that Mitchell Robinson is doing is absolutely incredible. And I know, like, when you dig into some of the individual rim numbers, the data is wonky and it just doesn't match anything that you're seeing, because he's covering so much ground from the outside in for the Knicks simultaneously. And it's just kind of everywhere. And there's a real deterrence to what he's doing. We're like, okay, opponents are kind of shooting good or well against him at the rim, but a lot of that stuff can happen when it's like, oh, they're coming in from the corners and the Knicks were a little bit late on their rotations. The looks that he is just erasing before they ever happen is mind-blowing to me. You mentioned the stuff he's doing on the offensive glass. It feels like he's getting, this is anecdotal, it feels like he's just getting to more 50-50 balls than I've ever seen in my entire life. And the ability for him to just sort of recover and get to the basket on the offensive end after a shot goes up, it helps your defense, because if he's getting the offensive rebound and he's either going back up with it and scoring, or he's passing it to someone who hits a wide open jumper or is cutting, it allows you to get your defense set. And I feel like that's an element that we kind of undersell, is like him being on the offensive glass increases your efficiency on the offensive end, which then allows you to get your defense set, which should improve the state of your defense. I haven't gone through my all defensive teams, but he's probably been one of the 10 best defenders in basketball so far.
I agree. It's tough because of the Embiid, and it's positional, and the Embiid Gobert hold and then obviously Brook Lopez hold that exists. It's going to be tough for Mitch to get there, but I agree. He's in the conversation for what he's been this year so far. And
them getting rid of positions helps bigs more than anyone, including Mitchell Robinson. Official.
The defense, all defense teams as well are in position. Oh, so Mitch has a shot then. Okay.
Yeah, when we were doing our awards podcast, we looked into it to make sure. So we might have been given the wrong information and been wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is the year that all defense is positionless.
Per Bleacher Report, Dan Favale reports that
aggregate it.
What's up?
Well, I mean, it was reported.
Aggregate it, yes.
We just couldn't find it. So yeah, I'm buying into him. Excuse me. I'm buying into RJ Barrett's turn. When you just kind of look at his efficiency from the floor, it doesn't wow you, aside from three, but he's just gotten so much better as a decision maker. And the thing that I look to the most, there's the 3-point percentage for sure. Like, that is huge. It opens up the floor. But he is so much smarter on his drives when it's, let's get defenders on my hip, or the passes that he's going to throw off of those drives. And when you dig into the data on how much more effective those passes are off these drives, it's absolutely huge. And now we're kind of back to it being, okay, when he's playing independent of the starters, this is super fun. That's how you sort of inject even more pace into an offense that, look, the ball might be moving faster. They might be playing a little bit faster. They're still 30th in average offensive possession time, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so injecting that pace with the RJ plus lots of bench players units has been great. And I am still very curious to see, can this be someone who develops a more efficient in-between game? Or if you're going to lower your volume at the rim like he's done, can you be a more efficient finisher than being shooting 60 or 61%? And a lot of that is, I do still think it's some spacing concerns around him at times, but a lot of the other stuff is his takeoff points around the basket can be super weird. But he is just so much more of a cerebral player this year. And he just feels at both ends really more complimentary, kind of like, what was that, year 2? When we were just all really excited about how complimentary he was being. I think that was the second year.
He shot 40 from 3 in the open gym. Yeah.
And so it feels, you have more like that feeling, but because of the circumstances under which it's coming, where it's, he's still playing a bunch with Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson this time, but then he's has some independent units. It feels not just that it's more sustainable, but it feels more important than it's ever felt to me.
The point I made yesterday on a pregame pod, because I'm just flat out going to get asked about his shooting while he's shooting 50% from 3. It's just is this a thing now? And his shot looks better from my untrained eye about whether shots look better or not. I'm not wincing on it. RJ threes. I'm now at the point as a fan expecting them to go in. So we'll see when the regression comes, how far it regresses. But you're right on the decision making. And the point I made yesterday was that this is the first year he's really gone from season to season with continuity in role, where year one, it was I'm with Julius and all these other power forwards my rookie year, and I have no idea when I'm going to have an unimpeded path to the rim. Year two, he was just a corner 3-point shooter, and they ran the offense through Julius and Derrick Rose and other people, and like he got his cuts and his drives to the rim. And then year three, with whatever was going on with Julius and the uncertainty with the team, he got a 30 usage the second half of that year, and you didn't know if this was like a thing with RJ or if he was, just boosting his trade value. And then last year, his worst year as a pro so far, he was like caught in this middle ground of like, I run the second unit, but quickly's taking a leap. And then I'm next to Julius, but it's really Jalen Brunson's team. And this year, he's actually settled into like third best guy that takes over as the second guy from time to time. And he runs a second unit that he now has some chemistry with. And these two lineups that they have with RJ on the floor, they're starters. These are plus 17. They're bench, they're plus 7. And everything's a positive when RJ Barrett's factored in.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm like wondering about when I watch him, if it will sustain, I'm not sold. I actually kind of am sold on the 3-point efficiency. Not this high.
Not 50%. He's not going to be Doug McDermott. You're right.
Right. He's no Dylan Brooks, like he's not going to shoot 55%.
No, he's going to, he's not going to. Exactly.
So I think right now, the last time I checked, and he didn't play against the Hawks, he was 8 of 15 on floaters. And it's like, that's like a real tool in his belt. And can that efficiency sustain? Because it turns him into like a multi-level scorer in a way that, when you look at kind of the pull-up numbers on a lot of his jumpers, that's not there yet. It may never be at a high enough clip to trust him to do that. And when you know that he's never going to be that type of off the dribble shooter from beyond the arc anyway, I wouldn't think to have that just sort of as a weapon makes him that much harder to defend. And then look, maybe it ends up with, if he's knocking down that consistently, in addition to the passing improvement that we've seen and just like getting better at having defenders on his hip, do we see his free throw attempt rate at some point just absolutely explode? And that's just another way for him to get some easy points, especially if he can shoot better than 71% at the foul line.
Yeah, I think as far as the other stuff that I mentioned about the Knicks, I think you kind of mentioned the Julius of it all. That I'm glad you are on the record on this pod saying like Julius Randle is a good basketball player. That's what we should evaluate him as. There are questions come playoffs that he's going to eventually have to answer, but like you win a lot of regular season games with a guy as your first or second option or high usage option. That probably means you're a good basketball player.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, look, it was kind of at the start of the season. It felt like there were moments where his process was a lot better. Then he would completely get away from it. Now it feels like over the past 2 or 3 games or whatever that he's gotten a little bit better. I did not see their most recent game against the Hawks, but like the previous 2, it just felt like, so even when the shots weren't going in, like this wasn't someone who was hijacking the offense or taking these inexplicable shots. And like when he is making smart decisions as a passer, where he's reacting to the double teams or even beating them sometimes with his playmaking, that's a fully optimized version of the Knicks, even when he's not super efficient on the offensive end. I think, if you want to be concerned about anything, it's his 3-point volume last year was so important to what they were doing. And so I'm seeing right now, he went 3 of 5 against the Hawks. That's great. It's almost more important to me that he took 8 3-pointers against the Celtics, because it's like, that volume helps open up the floor. And the Knicks do need that as part of their half-court offense, in part because, and I'm assuming we're going to talk about him in a second, of the struggles that Jalen Brunson is facing right now, where there are times where he has not looked the same when he's getting inside the arc, but I will blame basically everyone else other than Jalen Brunson for like the difficulty of some of the looks he's need to take, where the biggest difference is he's not hitting some of the ridiculously tough shots he was last year. He is shooting 36% on contested and heavily contested twos. He was shooting like 47, 48% on those.
What does he hit the rim? Do you have it near you? What does he hit the rim? Because that was the thing that stood out in the Hawks game most recently, that he just like, it wasn't even rim protection, like that Clint Capella was deterring shots or whoever was guarding him was making the shots difficult. He just was missing bunnies at the rim that he, like you said, was making last season.
Yeah, I mean, as of right now, he's shooting 47% at the rim. 15
right, so there's
32.
that regression that I think a lot of Knicks fans are waiting for. That
it also feels like
shots start to fall.
I'm saying he feels like, if I have the numbers in front of me, why don't I just toggle to the window that can confirm it? Yeah, and look, I was about to say, it feels like he's getting to the rim a lot less. He's getting to the rim a lot. Like 21% of his shots came at the rim last year. That's not a lot to begin with. Down to 16 this year. I do think a lot of that, though, has to do with the way that defenses are able to guard the Knicks, and Barrett playing the way that he has and Julius Randle hiking up some of the volume or the passing. I think that can improve it. And the fact that Jalen Brunson has still been like, some of the threes he's hitting this year, like those are really tough looks. And he's almost, I wonder if that's why he's not getting to the basket as much. He's like, these shots aren't going in. I have to work so hard from here. I'm going to fire this one up off the dribble. That's something I'm watching where I would just bank on Jalen Brunson is going to be a more efficient basketball player by year's end inside the arc. But it is, this late into the season, it's kind of like, yeah, all right, I'm a little bit uneasy because the Knicks are, the best version of the Knicks is going to include one or both of Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson being a ridiculous shot maker inside the arc.
Yeah. And I think the 2-point regression to the mean is coming. I think he just set a ridiculous standard for himself last year that we're coming to expect not too much of him, but like like any concerns we have are like, oh no, he's averaging, this inside the arc this early in the season. I do think they've made an effort to play him off ball more, which with RJ being what he is so far this year and looking to pass on his drives more and hit the weak side open 3-point shooter, that's been Jalen Brunson a lot of times. And that's where like this play in the most recent game for the Knicks that Mitchell Robinson makes this huge offensive rebound, and it's a catch and shoot for Jalen Brunson. Later on in the fourth quarter, it's another catch and shoot in the corner for Jalen Brunson, where he's playing off ball rather than him having to depend on pull-up threes like he did last year so much.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the fact that he's fully, there were questions about whether he could do stuff like that earlier on in Dallas, to where do you trust him to hit 45.5% of his catch and shoot threes all season? I'd probably bet on that number pulling back a little bit. He's a viable threat as like in that type of role. So
viable threat, and it allows you to play quickly. Like then quickly can run the offense and be a primary ball handler, and you have a 45% 3-point shooter off the ball. So I'm very happy with where the only thing that's frustrated me so far in Knicks land is availability. Like RJ, get well soon. Like shout out to
let's pump in full of some
fluids. Yeah, exactly. Whatever it takes to get this migraine gone. The 4 games RJ has missed.
Water and bear. That's what I'm recommending.
Water and bear. Oh, bear. Okay, I heard bear, like a bear, like the animal. Wait. So maybe that's what'll fix it. Yeah. There you go. Maybe that's also the 3 essentials.
I know their record is not super impressive, but when you just dig into where they rank in offense and defense, and the bigger thing is, I don't know what their strength of schedule has been, but it had to be one of like the 7 or 8 hardest in the league so far. And so to come out of that above 500 when you've been dealing with this level of Jalen Brunson, this level of Julius Randle for a lot of the season, that's actually a pretty good place to be in. Like this is an extreme, and they're missing a more important player, but look at what is happening to the Grizzlies. Or you can look at what's happening to, we have faith that the Suns are going to rebound. You can't give up ground too quickly early on. And like the Grizzlies, their season's just over already. And again, more injuries, Ja's not there, yada, yada, yada. But the Knicks, like navigating some struggles from the collective against a difficult schedule, even though they weren't playing some of the teams that were also not at full strength. I count that as an absolute win for this team.
Listen, I echo my brother Jonathan Macri that was like, I'll take 5-5 through the first 10, and I do have a bit of higher projection for the next 9. Like we're basically trying to get to the in-season tournament in one piece, but like we're doing this podcast. Like I switched to an all things NBA format for this episode because this is the 4th back-to-back that the Knicks have played in their first 12 games this season. There's 14 games this season. It's actually pretty ridiculous that they're already playing this many games in this short amount of time. They've played the Celtics twice. They've already played the Bucks. They've played the Cavaliers twice. They played some pretty good teams so far. And to your point about strength of schedule, the data's out there that their schedule gets lighter. And we'll see what these 2 games against teams they're better than should be this weekend, That's
what I'm going to say. Their schedule gets a little bit easier because that's the effect of playing the Hornets twice, the Wizards, and the Pistons before November closes out. So
listen, I'll take it. When we start off the season and the first 5 are Boston, and then the Hawks on the road, a back-to-back in New Orleans the next night, then the back-to-back in Cleveland, and then Milwaukee, and then they get a respite and they play the new look Clippers. Like, there was a stretch where I wondered if just every game the Knicks weren't going to be favored going into this year.
Honestly, playing the new look Clippers is probably a pretty good pull at this point.
We didn't know that at the time, though, Dan. Going into that game, I was like, oh, great. We have to go back home and we get to play this Clippers that just added a Hall of Famer. Last thing before we get out of here, I've been doing the thing where I do a Mount Rushmore of rivals here on the pregame pod. You're obviously not, you don't have a team that you cover specifically. So what I'll get is your Mount Rushmore of League Pass teams. What are the 4 teams you look forward to the most? I think I already know that the Pacers are on this, but the 4 teams that you're like, oh, I'm circling this on the calendar because these 4 teams are playing.
I'm going to not include the Knicks here for any Knicks fans that get mad, in part because this is a Knicks podcast. And so they've been talked about enough. The Pacers, for sure, have probably been the most entertaining watch this year. No. So I'm going to rank them 2. Nuggets 1.
Okay. Still.
Pacers 2. Oklahoma City 3. It's probably too early. It's probably, honestly, Wolves 4. The Kings, though. De'Aaron Fox has missed too much time. But like the De'Aaron Fox games are riveting if you haven't checked out the Kings just yet. And they are, when he's not on the floor, it's the opposite of riveting. So we'll go with Minnesota. So Minnesota at 4, OKC at 3, Pacers at 2, Denver Nuggets at 1.
So 2 ends of the spectrum that we didn't talk about. You buying the Dallas start to the season? We'll start there.
Yes, but it still feels like their Achilles heel will be their playoff undoing, which is just sort of the defense. And when they cater towards too much of it, like Derrick Jones Jr. has been really good for them. Their starting lineup, though, is actually a net negative on the season. And a lot of that, again, fluky shooting from opponents, yada, yada, yada. They need to go out there and find like kind of another wing who is not as offensively limited, even though Derrick Jones Jr. has been good for them. And I'm just curious to see, okay, they're relying on Derek Lively a lot, and he's been great. He's been great for them. What happens if he hits a rookie wall, as we tend to see with a lot of the kids? So I buy it, but like the defense is still not good enough for me to be, well, they're at the same time kind of who we thought they are. I will say one of the most pleasant early season trends, Luka not complaining as much, and he's played better defense. There you go.
And then the other thing, the team with the longest winning streak of the NBA are the hated Miami Heat. They have not won any of these games by double figures, and they've been playing the bottom of the league throughout this winning streak. Are they just going to do this to us again, where they just kind of win every close game that exists? And even if they end up with like 41 wins, it's like, yeah, but every game that you're going to have to beat them by is by 5 or 6 points. Yeah.
I just default towards there's alien stuff going on in Miami. I don't trust them when I look at them on paper, but it's just Jimmy Butler starts the season injured, looks terrible. Start like shooting 50% from 3 now. Bam Adebayo is definitely leveled up. They have Caleb Martin back. They're kind of doing it again where they're finding guys to contribute with Hayward Highsmith, and Jaime Jaquez has been pretty good for them, even though he's not hitting his threes. Kyle Lowry's been super low usage, but he's hitting his threes. They just seem to figure it out. And so I look at them and I say, no, like this is not a real threat, but I have to default to being wrong about that because we've now, what are we in year like 12 of this happening, where it's just, they're going to find a way. And I do think the single biggest development for them, though, might be the past 2 years, Bam Adebayo has really leveled up his offense.
He has. This team's been outscored this year. Well, not like point differential totally, but in per 100 possessions, they're 18th in that rating, and it's a minus. And they're just winning games. They won 7 in a row.
And none of them by double figures. Lineup data, but like Tyler Hero's been out right now. Caleb Martin has played in 2 games, so they probably haven't had their best 4-man lineup ever. 5-man lineup, ever on the court this season. So, and you look, and it's like, what were they at one point, 1-4 or something? And then you look up and they're like, oh, it's 8 in a row later. They've just won games. So I've given up on trying to understand or explain Miami.
Look, Knicks fans don't want to hear it because there's a need and a desire to dismiss them. And I was ready to dance on the grave at 1-4, but I was like, I'm still going to be terrified when they're a 35-win 10 seed. And it's like, yeah, I still would probably pick them to win the East, but now they're at least going to be in the it seems like in the conversation, yet it's still going to be the same conversation of, yeah, they're like a 7 or 8 seed. I'd probably pick them to win every playoff game that they play.
I still, push comes to shove, will probably marry the idea. Like they need a pretty significant acquisition to change, to like really be like, okay, they come out of the East and they're just going to get trucked by Denver again is what's going to happen. So I will die on that hill. And I also, I picked Milwaukee to come out of the East, but as someone who doubted the Celtics more so before the Drew Holiday trade, after the Drew Holiday trade, I was like, they scare the shit out of me. And it's just, even watching the Knicks try to defend them sometimes stresses me out as someone who tries to just be this like heartless observer. And I'll watch it and it's not just the Knicks. It's like, it stresses me. Their offense isn't even like special at a lot of points because the ball movement isn't there and they don't have the same type of playmaking, but they stretch you to the point of absolutely breaking you. And Kristaps Porzingis is a much smarter player than he was 2 or 3 years ago. And it's, if they're healthy, which is the caveat for every team, but you look at kind of the top of this roster, man, was I wrong about the Celtics.
The craziest thing about the Celtics for me, and like the Knicks have played them twice, so they've gotten 2 looks at this. One of them was without RJ, so you take it with a grain of salt. But my goodness, they have so many things that you have to take into account when you're defending them. And even like they started pressing in the third quarter of the game the Knicks played on Monday. And the Knicks were getting into their offense with like 12 seconds on the shot clock. And it just led to these inefficient shots in the third quarter. And while you're a Knicks fan, you're like, why can't you be better? It's like, actually, just look across the aisle. Like the other team is pressing 11 games into the season. And they can, because this is how many weapons that they have. And you try to shut one thing down, like, oh, Jaylen Brown's having an off night. Tatum's having an off night. Kristaps is missing. Oh, but there's Sam Hauser hitting like 6 threes and you're kind of screwed.
And look, there's 83-year-old Al Horford holding up in space again. And my biggest compliment to their offense, though, is that Mitchell Robinson needs to do peak Anthony Davis against the Warriors things to salvage a lot of defensive possessions because of just how, again, the word is just how far out the Celtics stretch you. And the fact that we saw him do them on some possessions is pretty big deal. But their offense and the way it's spaced induces anxiety for me as a bystander.
Yeah. Someone said it in the post game the other night, like Mitchell Robinson is dominating every team in the NBA except one. Like against 28 other teams in the NBA, he's been a dominant force. But when he plays the Celtics, that's just like the one team that you wonder, can he stay on the court?
And it's because he needs to do so much. And honestly, what is the alternative? Like, because he has to stay on the court, because what are you going to in that moment? You don't, like, we know the Knicks are not going to go centerless. Like
they're not. No.
And Isaiah Hartenstein, okay, like he's not going to be much different for you. Like Mitchell Robinson is better than Isaiah Hartenstein. Hot take. Mitchell Robinson's better on defense than Isaiah Hartenstein. So again, their offense is, and it all comes down to the floor balance, because when you watch it, it's absurd shot making and just spacing and like smart, like kind of like the way Al Horford and Kristaps Porzingis know how to work off the ball and, you know, kind of like toggle and flip their screens. I was wrong. I mean, I'm wrong, I'm wrong all the time, but I was pretty damn wrong about the Celtics.
I think my biggest early season conclusion is that if the Celtics are healthy, I think they're winning the title. That is the most unstoppable thing I've seen this year, is that starting 5.
See, I'd be willing to go as far as they're going to win the East, but like Denver is honestly is just an annihilator of worlds. And it's,
you're right. That's actually, I give the Celtics a nod because there's a defensive ceiling that they can get to that I wonder if it can match what any dominant thing Denver can do. I should give the champs more credit than that. I think we're getting a Celtics in the finals against Denver, but
that'd be a good test of Denver's defense. Has been really good this year, and a huge part of that has been Michael Porter Jr. I mean, Jokic has been better too, but Michael Porter Jr. has improved a lot as a rebounder and defender. So I would love just like matchup. It doesn't have to be like, if the Celtics and the Nuggets are fully healthy, I hope that when they face each other this year, that they go full bore in the regular season, because I do think those are pretty clearly the 2 best teams in the league. And there's a chance Milwaukee could sneak in there if they're healthy enough. But they feel, you mentioned your concerns about their defense, and like Dame's been all over the place with his shooting too so far.
And look, that could change. And maybe in a small sample, every answer for everything that the Bucks could potentially do, the Celtics have an answer for.
Yes.
And I don't know if the Bucks are able to respond with like, okay, well, we can respond and answer with this. You know, the Celtics just what they're doing to teams right now. And look, the Knicks, like I said this on the pregame pod with Jack Simone the other day about the way you beat the Celtics early on is like hope they miss their threes. Their three like near losses this year. They almost lost the Knicks game, and they lost 2 games against the Timberwolves and the against the Sixers are their 3 worst 3-point performances this year. That's like the games that they shoot 30 and under from 3, you got a shot. If they're at 35% from 3, just like good night, Irene. And that I think is where I'm successfully spooked by any illusions that like the Knicks could upset them in the playoffs. I do think the Knicks could get a game or 2. And look, this could all be mute because RJ Barrett is going to continue to take this leap, and they almost beat the Celtics with RJ, and they didn't have RJ for the second one. So who knows? I'm successfully bought into what the Celtics can be, and I will be rooting very hard against it because it's in my New York DNA.
As it should be.
As it should be, exactly. Dan, as always, thank you for joining me. We went a little longer than I said we would, and I know you got to run. But before you go, tell the fine folks at home where they can find you and Hardwood Knocks, specifically on the socials where you do, in my opinion, some of your best work.
Yeah, go check out Hardwood Knocks. It's wherever you get your podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We post on TikTok as well at Hardwood Knocks, and all the socials are at Hardwood Knocks, and we post these shorts where they're quizzes, where they're, start, bench, cut, these NBA signature moves. So we call it stat padding because we're not trying to hide what we're doing. We try to get a little creative with it. Like which player would you clone and build which team wins, 5 Lou Dorts or 5 Jordan Poole. So that's the type of technical basketball analysis that we provide, but we strive to be the least insufferable national NBA podcast out there. And I think we do a pretty damn good job. So go check us out. Again, Hardwood Knocks, spelled exactly as it sounds, wherever you listen to any of your basketball content.
I co-sign everything he said, both the quality of the podcast with Grant Hughes and how often I enjoy it. Like, I'm someone that tries to reach out to every single team a fan of someone who covers every single team. And
you guys
I recognize
with the pregame pods that you, this one notwithstanding because you're slumming it, but the pregame shows that you do forever, that's just like, that's a special type of commitment and nuance. So
listen,
I appreciate those.
You know where I get a lot of my ideas for guests? They went on for the look ahead before the season at Hardwood Knocks. I just go through your Rolodex and I'm like, oh, Dan Favale had this person on. I can reach out to them. So it takes one inspiration to know another, Dan,
I appreciate that. And thank you so much as usual for having me on.
Of course, man. Welcome anytime.